Over the last 3 decades, Iran has been portrayed as the enemy of the West. The media and politicians have presented Iranian ambitions as expansionist, self-seeking, and dangerous. Britain and America have also suggested her nuclear program will destabilize the region and even the world. However, in 2013, the West finally offered the hand of friendship in the form of sober negotiations to see if an accord could be created which served the interests of Iran and the West. But why now? And why has it taken so long for the West to shift its language from threats of war to offers of talks? These were the simple questions we sought to answer. We began by testing the public's knowledge about recent historical events. We asked which country has killed the largest number of people using nuclear bombs and invited them to estimate how many people that was. Here's what they said. Do you know which country has killed the most number of people using nuclear bombs and how many died?
Most likely going to be the US over in World War II. I would say a couple of million. I don't know if that's in the region, but I would say it was the US.
Well, that'd be United States, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, presumably.
Hiroshima was about 180,000, although I think that figure's contentious, and I think Nagasaki was about 100,000.
Do you know which country has killed the most number of people using nuclear weapons and how many died?
I would say that's probably the USA when they bombed Japan, and I've no idea how many died. Maybe 500,000?
America, and a couple of 100,000, I guess.
Iran, maybe.
America or Russia. How many have we killed who have nuclear weapons? 10 million.
We turned to our experts to clarify how many people were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II by American nuclear weapons.
Unfortunately, United States used 2 atomic weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of Second World War, and 200,000 people were killed and many injured who subsequently died as a result of the injuries in the next few years.
I think everybody knows that the atom bombs are used by America during Second World War. The first one was in August 1945. The first one was on Hiroshima, and there about 120,000 people were killed. And the second one was on Nagasaki. There, I think, about 90,000 people were killed. And since then, no other country has actually exploded bombs, on the people. Of course, there have been hundreds of tests done in the atmosphere, underground, and so on, but no country has used bombs, in military conflict and killed that many people.
Next, we asked the public why they thought the West had threatened war against Iran before offering negotiations. Why do you think the West threatened war against Iran first, before negotiations?
Well, this was part of the Bush strategy, when they started to attack, they want to attack Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran was on the plan as well. Because for the main reason, as they did in Iraq, to secure the petrol, the oil reserve, and just to take care of the Western business, that's it.
Serve their own purposes, I don't know. Perhaps.
Because I think once a country's got the nuclear bomb, then you can't attack them. Then the West can't attack them.
Probably due to politics, maybe to do with fuel. Don't really know.
Why do you think the West threatened war against Iran before negotiations?
I have no idea. Probably ignorance rather than deliberate strategy.
Fear. Fear of that. Obviously, they're going to do exactly the same to them and Israel.
To focus their mind.
I guess kind of hoping that might is right and all that. kind of, we're stronger than you, so listen to us, otherwise we'll bomb you type of thing, I guess.
Scare tactics, maybe. Put them in a corner and then they have nothing, no kind of way of getting out of it.
So those were the views of the public. What were the practical considerations behind this? We turn to our experts.
I think the Western world is just it's a big title. See, we have to be specific. When you say the West, of course, America is number one. But then there is Britain, there is France, there is Germany. So there are 4 countries, and of course, they are not always on the same wavelength. In terms of America, this basic problem goes back to George W. Bush presidency. You know, after 9/11, in January 2002, he made a statement. He said they're the axis of evil, 3 countries, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and Iran and North Korea. And of course, in 2003, he attacked Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and then we know what happened. And then it was expected that he is going to attack Iran, Islamic regime in Iran. That did not happen, but you know, that's basically the starting point of the whole problem. And then later on, of course, there were talks between Iran and the European Union, 3 countries, that's Britain, France, and Germany. And even though America did not participate, America was what you may call, you know, backseat driver. They were telling them what to accept, what not to accept. Of course, this thing went on, but just to remind people, in 2005, when the talks were going on with the European Union, Iran had said, yes, we are enriching uranium, and we'll put a high limit of 5,000 centrifuges. Okay, so that was where the talks broke down and so on. And at the behest of US, this issue was referred to UN Security Council in 2006. So that's the background. But again, there I have to say it's not West and all 4 powers working together. Mainly it's America who's the driving force against Iran. And why are they doing it? Basically, America has not accepted the Islamic regime in Iran. So, okay, their main plan was, after overthrowing Saddam Hussein, they were going to overthrow the regime in Tehran. That's basically the main reason why this has gone on for so long.
Next, we asked the public if they felt the West ought to respect Iran's nuclear enrichment program under the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which relates to nuclear weapons.
Yes, do you think the West must respect Iran's nuclear enrichment program under the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
I think they should. They're a developed country who are looking to modernise and to use that going forward for energy. And so I believe, yeah, I think the West should.
I suppose if one person has done it, another one wants to do the same thing, but what can you do about it?
Do you think the West must respect Iran's nuclear enrichment rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Yes. I don't really have any strong opinions on that, but as long as a country is using nuclear technology to I don't know, for power purposes or for whatever kind of peaceful purposes, and they're allowing independent inspections, for instance through the UN or through other NGOs to go in and check that that's what's happening, then I don't think there should be any problem with them doing that.
Yes, but I guess it's kind of slightly hypocritical, the West saying you can't do it and then we do it. But then I guess we have, I don't know, but my knowledge isn't good, but I would say the Americans aren't really ever going to go and bomb someone else. Like, they wouldn't be allowed.
I would love to have access to the ability to make that decision myself, but on the basis of press reports and things which, bits of science that I don't fully understand, I couldn't understand whether there's a difference between the 2 programs that is sufficiently clear to be policeable.
Is that feasible? We asked our experts.
Iran has rights under Article 4.1 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. Apart from that, Iran has the right to enrichment under the terms of the history of negotiations which led to the signing and coming into operation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because if you look at the history of the negotiations, it was at that time really Germany, Italy and Japan who insisted more than any other country to have the right to enrichment and also have a right even to a plutonium production plant as early as 1960s when the negotiations were taking place. So not only Iran has the right to enrichment and the right to have a plutonium reactor under the terms of the NPT Article 4.1, but also the way the history of negotiations and the emphasis which the parties put on this right. If you read the background of the negotiations, it is absolutely very clear that the right to enrichment and also the right to have a production reactor has been ensured in the treaty.
There are three different entities. One is, of course, United States, the White House, and there is the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, IAEA, which has 35 governing board, and then the UN Security Council. Okay? So there are three different entities involved here. You see, as long as there was a problem between, say, Iran and between European Union, because America was not talking to Iran at all, okay? Though they were talking through back channels, they were not talking openly. So it was between the European Union, three powers, E3, EU3, and Iran. And then when this thing, did not get very far, it went to the IAEA 35 members, and they voted by majority to put the issue before the Security Council. So from 2006, Security Council has passed resolutions, which are specific about any organizations or individuals involved in Iran's nuclear power, it's a nuclear program, you see. But it doesn't extend to other elements of Iran's economy. That only has come through because of America extended that.
Sanctions are always a controversial issue. We asked the public if they felt that sanctions had been effective, given that during the time of the sanctions, the number of centrifuges used for nuclear enrichment had increased in Iran from a few hundred to 19,000.
How effective do you think the sanctions were if Iran actually managed to increase the number of centrifuges which are used to enrich uranium from just a few hundred to 19,000 while the sanctions were being imposed?
Well, I think the sanctions were effective in the respect that they're now around the negotiating table rather than having a nuclear weapon. So from that respect, yes, I think they were effective.
Well, that's the problem with sanctions. Sanctions affects the people, not the military. So, or the government directly. It affects the people on the street.
How effective were the sanctions if Iran still managed to increase the number of centrifuges from just a few hundred to 19,000?
Well, if that is the case and they actually managed to do that, then it's not very successful at all.
Obviously not. No, it's scary. I don't know if the sanctions were useful. In my head, I think they must have been, otherwise we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now, where it seems that Iran have done potentially an about turn and come to the table. So I'm guessing they might have been. That's just a view, but I don't know for sure.
We turned to our experts to clarify whether sanctions had been effective in limiting Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Well, it's clear that the sanctions have not had any impact as far as Iran's nuclear program is concerned. And if you see that Iran has made some major concessions in the latest Geneva negotiations and the interim agreement of November 2013, it has been due to President Rouhani's own a government policy of confidence-building measures rather than any effect of sanctions as such having influence on the nuclear deal, nuclear negotiations.
The sanctions against Iran were never legally ratified by the United Nations Security Council, which did not pass a resolution to that effect. As such, the sanctions were unilateral and tormented the lives of millions of Iranians, not least because of the lack of medical provisions that this caused. Given the unlawful and cruel nature of these sanctions, we asked the public if they felt there should be any consequences to the countries which had implemented them.
The sanctions against Iran weren't cited as officially lawful in the sense that they fell outside the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and they were also unilateral in that some countries did them and others didn't. They did seem to affect the lives of millions of Iranians, partly because of the medical blockade. Given all that, do you think there should be any consequences to the countries who did impose sanctions against Iran or not?
From my perspective, I think that we've imposed the sanctions for the right reasons, so no.
Are there consequences that can be exercised under law? The question I would ask is, if it's the case that the United Nations will only endorse a sanction under certain circumstances, is it illegal under international law to exercise sanctions without a UN resolution? And if it is illegal, then clearly a punishment should be meted out. If it's not illegal, then perhaps international law should be amended.
Well, I don't think there'll be any consequences, but I think there probably should be. You know, it's out, if the UN don't sanction it, it's outside the international law, so the people that did that should, you know, get some repercussions, but they probably won't.
I'm not sure really. I'm not sure I understand enough about the sanctions and how they were applied. I only just kind of know that they exist and some countries applied them, so I can't really answer that.
It's a strange world we're in nowadays, and I guess it just takes a few people with a good soul who cares about the world and other people to perhaps do something. I don't know who that person would be. Definitely not me. But the world's always been the same. There are problems here, there and everywhere.
What is the legal situation with regard to these sanctions? We asked our experts.
There is a need for setting up a commission, an international commission, to investigate and also to make recommendations as to why a set of sanctions were imposed on Iran and deal not only with the UN Security Council resolutions against Iran, but also the background as to who advised the policymakers, because in my view the research institutes, the academics and the media and the whole range of people who are involved in influencing the governments of various countries, providing either misconceived or deliberately false information as to what these legal obligations of the treaties are extremely important, that an investigation to be set up.
The Israeli Prime Minister said that the deal which lifted sanctions against the Iranian people was not a historic agreement, but rather a historic mistake. What effect does Israel's attitude have on the international peace process, and Iran in particular? Here's what the public thought.
The Israeli Prime Minister said that the deal that lifted sanctions against Iran's people was, and I quote, not a historic agreement, but rather a historic mistake. What effect does Israel's stance have on the initiative for peace?
A disruptive one, I think. They seem to have probably one agenda, and it's themselves. And I think it would aid everyone in that region if Israel would actually come to the table as well and involve themselves within that negotiation process.
I think the Israelis are dangerous. I think the Israelis are Well, just that. I think the Israelis are more of a threat than anybody else. Why the hell they've got a nuclear deterrent is completely beyond me.
Well, if the Israeli Prime Minister is saying the sanctions should still be there, then it probably should be.
The Israeli Prime Minister said that the deal that lifted the sanctions against Iran's people was, and I quote him, not a historic agreement, but rather a historic mistake. What effect does Israel have on the international peace process?
Well, Israel does have lots of concern on this, and the problem is that Israel looks on his garden only, and the garden of his own allies, and should be more moderate. The mistake is the answer that the Prime Minister gave, not the decision itself.
Well, I find Israel quite a scary country, generally, mainly because of their blinkered, dogmatic views towards international politics. So I think Israel is only interested in Israel, and therefore they can be quite disruptive in the region, yeah.
I guess a lot of it's to do with religion. And I just wish we could all be more tolerant of one another, as hard as it is.
Has Israel's attitude been helpful or harmful to the process as a whole? We turn to our experts.
I believe a large part of Israel's official statements against Iran's nuclear program is rhetorical. And I believe that, in fact, there are many high-profile, prominent former Israeli policymakers who have actually, in the last few days, since the interim agreement was signed, expressed their support for this agreement and asked the current Israeli government to alleviate its negative, adverse comments in relation to this particular interim negotiation.
I think as far as the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is concerned, I think the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mr. Mohammad Zarif, put it very neatly. He said since 1991, Mr. Netanyahu has been saying that Iran is within 6 months of exploding or producing an atom bomb. 1991. Where are we now? 2013. 12 years have gone by. So he's always, exaggerating, and of course, his old idea, the old story about wolf is coming, okay? Always doing the same thing. So basically overplaying the whole thing. At the same time, in every country, whether it's Iran, whether the USA, whether Israel, there are hardliners. So each leader has basically a right hand flank to cover, and so they say and do certain things in order to keep them quiet and say we are doing our best.
It seems the British public are supportive of a less aggressive approach to Iranian relations. They value the importance of seeing a non-military accommodation with one of the most important countries in the Middle East. But will the politicians listen to their people? If democracy is about representing the views of the public, they have only one choice: to end talk of war and seek terms of peace. This, more than anything, can secure a stable region and a peaceful world. It is perhaps ironic that the lead country in these negotiations is also the only one to kill over 100,000 citizens of another nation with nuclear weapons, the United States of America.